Hello. Good evening, welcome back to another quiet journey through history. Imagine standing beneath a sky so clear that every star seems close enough to touch. Around you stretches a vast plateau surrounded by rugged mountains, wind-swept deserts, and fertile valleys where rivers quietly carve their way through the land. A traveler passes along an ancient road carrying silk, spices, precious stones, and stories gathered from lands thousands of miles apart. He has no idea that he is walking through a place that will shape the course of civilizations for more than 2,000 years. The empire that will rise here will command continents, inspire kings, challenge conquerors, and leave behind traditions that survive long after its palaces have become silent ruins. Yet what makes this story remarkable is not simply the rise of powerful rulers or enormous armies. It is that, across 25 centuries, this land repeatedly found ways to endure. Dynasties collapsed. Foreign invaders arrived. Religions changed. Capitals moved. Borders expanded and shrank. But the idea of Iran, its language, culture, memory, and identity, continued to survive, adapting to every new age while never entirely forgetting the old one. If you enjoy these slow walks through history, perhaps consider leaving a quiet like on the video and subscribing if these stories have become part of your evenings. If you feel comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There is something strangely comforting about knowing that, while one person listens beneath the afternoon sun, another is settling into the stillness of midnight. Now allow the day to drift away. Let your breathing slow. Let the room grow quiet around you. Tonight, we travel across 2,500 years into one of humanity's oldest and most remarkable civilizations, the long and fascinating story of Iran. To understand Iran, we must first understand its geography. Unlike many ancient civilizations that grew almost entirely beside one great river, Iran developed across a vast plateau protected by natural barriers. Towering mountain ranges stretched across the north and west. To the south lay the warm waters of the Persian Gulf. Deserts occupied much of the interior, creating landscapes that were beautiful but demanding. Water was precious. Fertile land was scattered rather than continuous. Survival required planning, cooperation, and patience. These conditions shaped the people who lived here. Villages depended upon carefully managed irrigation systems. Shepherds guided sheep and goats through seasonal pastures. Farmers watched every cloud with hope. Merchants learned that prosperity came not only from growing crops but from connecting distant worlds. Long before Persia became famous, many different peoples called this plateau home. Elamite kingdoms flourished in the southwest. Mountain tribes established their own traditions. Caravan routes carried ideas alongside valuable goods. Every generation added another layer to the region's rich cultural foundation. By the first millennium before Christ, new groups speaking early Iranian languages had gradually settled across much of the plateau. Among them were the Medes and the Persians. At first, neither seemed destined to dominate history. The Medes established a powerful kingdom in northwestern Iran, while the Persians occupied a smaller territory farther south known as Pars, from which the word Persia would eventually emerge. For years, they lived beneath the shadow of larger empires, especially the mighty Assyrians, whose armies inspired fear throughout the ancient Near East. Assyria ruled through overwhelming military strength. Massive siege engines battered city walls. Relief carvings celebrated victories with grim detail. Many neighboring peoples obeyed because resistance often ended in destruction. But history rarely remains unchanged for long. The Assyrian Empire eventually weakened under the strain of constant warfare, political instability, and revolts. One by one, its enemies recognized an opportunity. The Medes joined forces with Babylon. Together they captured Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, in 612 BCE. One of the greatest empires of the ancient world disappeared, leaving behind a political vacuum stretching across much of Western Asia. For a brief moment, the Medes became the dominant power. Yet another transformation was already beginning. Far to the south, in the land of Pars, a prince named Cyrus was preparing to change history. History remembers him as Cyrus the Great. That title was not earned overnight. The surviving sources come from many different traditions: Persian, Babylonian, Greek, and Hebrew. Each tells the story differently. Some celebrate him almost as an ideal king. Others emphasize political calculation. Historians continue to debate where legend ends and reality begins. But almost everyone agrees on one point. Cyrus possessed extraordinary political talent. Rather than relying only on fear, he understood the value of cooperation. Rather than destroying defeated peoples whenever possible, he often incorporated them into his growing kingdom. That approach would become one of his greatest strengths. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus challenged the Median king Astyages. According to later accounts, some Median nobles defected during the conflict, dissatisfied with their ruler. Whether every detail is accurate remains uncertain, but the result is clear. Cyrus emerged victorious. Instead of wiping out the Medes, he united Persians and Medes into a single political structure. It was an early example of a pattern that would define his reign. Victory followed by inclusion. This mattered more than many people realized at the time. Conquering territory through force was one achievement. Convincing conquered populations to remain loyal afterward was something altogether different. Cyrus understood that lasting empires depended upon stability. His ambition soon extended beyond Iran itself. To the west stood Lydia, one of the wealthiest kingdoms of the ancient world. Its ruler, Croesus, became so famous for his riches that even today expressions about someone being rich as Croesus survive in many languages. Lydia possessed prosperous cities, valuable trade routes, and abundant resources. Defeating it would dramatically expand Persian influence. The campaign was not easy. Armies marched across broad plains beneath scorching summer skies. Horses carried armored riders over rough ground. Dust rose with every step until entire horizons seemed wrapped in pale clouds. Eventually, Cyrus captured Sardis, Lydia's magnificent capital. Once again, he demonstrated moderation toward many of the defeated population. Instead of destroying the kingdom entirely, Persian administration absorbed its institutions, preserving much of what already functioned well. It was an approach both practical and surprisingly modern. The empire continued to grow. Attention then turned toward Babylon. Few cities inspired greater awe. Babylon stood behind enormous defensive walls. Grand temples rose toward the heavens. Processional roads displayed colorful glazed bricks depicting lions and mythical creatures. The Euphrates River flowed proudly through the city, sustaining gardens, markets, workshops, and neighborhoods filled with life. Many believed Babylon could never fall. Yet in 539 BCE, Cyrus entered the city. Exactly how the conquest unfolded remains debated. Ancient sources disagree over the details. Some suggest military engineering redirected sections of the Euphrates, allowing troops to enter unexpectedly. Others emphasize political negotiations and local dissatisfaction with Babylon's ruler. Whatever happened, Cyrus gained control with remarkably little destruction compared to many ancient conquests. His reputation grew even further afterward. One reason was his treatment of conquered peoples. Among those living in Babylon were Jewish communities who had been exiled decades earlier. Cyrus permitted many of them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This decision earned lasting admiration in Jewish tradition and helped shape his historical legacy as a ruler remembered not only for conquest but also for tolerance. Modern historians are careful not to describe him as a perfect humanitarian by today's standards. He remained an ancient emperor whose armies fought wars and expanded territory through military power. Yet compared with many rulers of his era, his policies often emphasized accommodation rather than destruction. Perhaps nowhere is this image more visible than the famous Cyrus cylinder. Discovered in the ruins of Babylon, the clay cylinder records a royal proclamation describing Cyrus' rule. Some modern writers have called it the world's first declaration of human rights. Most historians believe that description goes too far. Documents praising victorious kings were common in the ancient Near East. Still, the inscription reveals something significant. Cyrus wanted to present himself as a ruler who restored order, respected local traditions, and gained legitimacy through justice rather than terror alone. That image mattered. Because empires are built not only with soldiers. They are also built with stories. As Persian authority expanded, an immense territory gradually emerged. From the shores of the Mediterranean to Central Asia. From Egypt to the mountains bordering India. Dozens of peoples now lived beneath one imperial government. Each spoke different languages. Each worshipped different gods. Each possessed unique customs stretching back centuries. Holding such diversity together required extraordinary organization. And this is where the story becomes even more remarkable. The empire did not simply conquer. It learned to govern. Royal officials supervised provinces known as satrapies. Local traditions were often respected, while regional governors answered to the king. Roads connected distant cities. Messengers traveled astonishing distances with remarkable speed for the ancient world. Trade expanded because merchants could move through territories protected by imperial authority. One famous route became known as the Royal Road. It stretched for well over 1,000 miles, linking major centers of the empire. Fresh horses waited at stations along the route, allowing royal couriers to travel with remarkable efficiency. Centuries later, the Greek historian Herodotus admired the Persian postal system, observing that neither snow, rain, heat, nor darkness prevented the royal messengers from completing their journeys. The empire was becoming something larger than conquest alone. It was becoming a connected world. Meanwhile, ordinary life continued beneath imperial rule. Farmers still harvested wheat beneath warm autumn skies. Children still learned family traditions beside evening fires. Craftsmen carved stone with patient hands. Women managed households, estates, and businesses in ways that varied across regions and social classes. Merchants filled bustling marketplaces where dozens of languages mixed together in friendly bargaining. For many people, the greatest concern was not imperial politics. It was whether the harvest would be good. Whether the caravan would arrive safely. Whether winter would be harsh. History often remembers kings. But civilizations survive because ordinary people continue living their ordinary lives. And while these peaceful rhythms unfolded across villages and cities, one ambitious ruler was quietly laying the foundations for an empire unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. But Cyrus's remarkable journey was only the beginning. In the next chapter of our story, the empire he created would grow even larger under new rulers, magnificent capitals would rise from stone, and Persia would become the greatest superpower on earth, while unseen challenges slowly gathered beyond its distant frontiers. The empire stretched farther than almost anyone of Cyrus's generation could have imagined. From the mountains of Central Asia to the fertile banks of the Nile, from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the distant frontiers near the Indus River, millions of people now lived beneath a single royal authority. Travelers crossed landscapes that changed from snow-covered peaks to warm coastal plains, from endless deserts shimmering beneath the afternoon sun to green valleys where rivers nourished orchards and fields. Every road carried different languages, different customs, and different beliefs. Yet somehow, they were all becoming part of one extraordinary political world. But every great empire eventually faces the same quiet question. How do you preserve what one remarkable person has built? Cyrus the Great did not live forever. Around 530 BCE, while campaigning in the northeastern frontiers of his empire, he died. The exact circumstances remain uncertain. Ancient writers offer different accounts. Some describe a fierce battle against nomadic tribes. Others tell dramatic stories that may contain more legend than fact. Historians cannot say with complete confidence exactly how his final days unfolded. What is certain is that the empire suddenly found itself without the man whose leadership had held it together. His son, Cambyses II, inherited both immense opportunity and enormous responsibility. Cambyses was determined to continue his father's expansion. His greatest ambition lay to the southwest, where one of history's oldest civilizations still flourished. Egypt. For thousands of years, the Nile had supported kingdoms whose monuments already seemed ancient even in Persian times. Great temples lined the river. Massive statues watched silently across the desert. Priests carefully preserved traditions that stretched back countless generations. Pharaohs had ruled there long before Persia had become a kingdom. Conquering Egypt would be no ordinary victory. It would signal that Persia had become the dominant power of the ancient Near East. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his campaign. The Persian army crossed difficult terrain through the Sinai Peninsula, where dry winds swept across endless sand and water was as valuable as gold. Supply lines had to be carefully organized. Every mistake could prove deadly long before a single battle began. Eventually, the Persians met the Egyptian forces near Pelusium. The battle ended in Persian victory, opening the road toward Memphis, one of Egypt's great cities. For the first time, the lands of the Nile became part of the Persian Empire. The achievement was enormous. Yet triumph often carries hidden dangers. Ancient accounts describe Cambyses as becoming increasingly unstable during his later years, though historians remain cautious. Much of what survives was written by later Greek authors who were not always sympathetic to Persia. Some stories portray him as cruel or irrational, but separating fact from political storytelling is difficult. Whatever the truth, uncertainty spread across the empire. While Cambyses was away, rebellions appeared. Rumors traveled faster than official news. Local governors wondered who truly held authority. In an empire stretching across 3 continents, confusion itself could become dangerous. Then came another turning point. Cambyses died unexpectedly while returning from Egypt. Almost immediately, several individuals claimed the throne. For ordinary people living hundreds of miles away, the situation must have felt deeply uncertain. Farmers preparing fields could only wonder which king would soon demand taxes. Merchants crossing mountain passes heard conflicting stories at every caravan stop. Provincial officials waited anxiously for messages that sometimes took weeks to arrive. Powerful empires often appear solid from a distance. Up close, they can be surprisingly fragile. Out of this uncertainty emerged a young nobleman named Darius. History remembers him as Darius the Great. Unlike Cyrus, Darius did not inherit unquestioned legitimacy. He had to earn it. According to the famous Behistun inscription, carved high into a cliff face in western Iran, Darius claimed that an impostor had seized the throne by pretending to be a royal prince. Darius declared that he defeated this false king with the support of loyal nobles and the blessing of the supreme god Ahura Mazda. Whether every detail reflects exactly what happened remains debated. What matters is that Darius understood something essential. To rule an empire, military victory alone was not enough. People also needed a convincing story explaining why he deserved to rule. Once secure on the throne, Darius faced an enormous task. Rebellions had erupted in many provinces. Some regions attempted to break away. Others supported rival claimants. Patiently, campaign by campaign, Darius restored imperial control. Only after stability returned could he begin the work for which he is remembered today. If Cyrus built the empire, Darius organized it. This may sound less dramatic than conquest, but history often turns on administration as much as battlefield victories. The empire was divided into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and overseeing local administration. To prevent any single governor from becoming too powerful, royal inspectors traveled throughout the empire. These inspectors became known, much later, as the eyes and ears of the king. Their presence reminded everyone that even distant officials answered to the throne. Taxes became more regular and predictable. Weights and measures were standardized. Royal records were carefully maintained. Economic life became increasingly connected across vast distances. One of Darius's greatest achievements was improving the royal road. Stretching for well over 1,500 miles, it connected Susa to Sardis through mountains, plains, rivers, and fertile valleys. Stations along the route provided fresh horses and supplies. Messages that once required months could now travel in weeks. Imagine standing beside that road at dawn. Dust rises gently as mounted couriers approach at remarkable speed. One rider dismounts. Another immediately continues the journey without delay. Sealed leather bags carry royal commands across an empire larger than anything most people could imagine. Somewhere beyond the next mountain range, another courier is already waiting. The system rarely slept. Trade flourished alongside communication. Caravans carried fine textiles, spices, ivory, precious metals, timber, glassware, perfumes, and grain. Ideas traveled with the merchants. Languages blended in busy marketplaces. Religious traditions encountered one another. Musicians learned unfamiliar melodies. Artisans borrowed techniques from distant cultures. The empire was not simply controlling territory. It was connecting civilizations. Darius also left behind one of history's most magnificent ceremonial capitals. Persepolis. Unlike older administrative cities, Persepolis was designed partly as a place of royal ceremony. Construction began around 518 BCE. Skilled workers arrived from every corner of the empire. Stonecutters from one region worked beside carpenters from another. Goldsmiths, sculptors, architects, and engineers all contributed to a project unlike anything Persia had previously attempted. The result was breathtaking. Wide staircases rose toward enormous terraces. Columns soared high into the sky, their capitals carved into graceful bulls and mythical creatures. Walls displayed finely carved reliefs showing delegations from every province bringing gifts to the king. Each delegation wore its own traditional clothing. Each carried offerings reflecting its homeland. One brought horses. Another carried woven fabrics. Others presented precious metals, exotic animals, carved vessels, or finely crafted weapons. The carvings reveal something fascinating. Rather than showing defeated enemies in chains, many scenes emphasize orderly cooperation. Whether this reflected political reality everywhere is another matter. But it clearly shows how Persian kings wished their empire to be remembered. Not simply as conquerors, but as rulers of many peoples united beneath one crown. Meanwhile, another important part of Persian identity continued to develop. Religion. The beliefs associated with the prophet Zoroaster, known today as Zoroastrianism, had likely been spreading for centuries before Darius. Exactly when Zoroaster lived remains uncertain. Historians continue to debate the dates. What seems clear is that belief in Ahura Mazda as the supreme creator became increasingly important within the royal court. Zoroastrian teachings emphasized truth, justice, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. They also described an ongoing struggle between truth and falsehood. These ideas influenced Persian kingship. Darius repeatedly declared that he ruled with the support of Ahura Mazda because he defended truth against lies and order against chaos. Of course, every ruler prefers to present himself as the defender of justice. Reality was often more complicated. Empires still demanded taxes. Armies still marched. Rebellions were still crushed. Yet compared with many neighboring powers, Persia generally allowed remarkable religious diversity. Local traditions often continued. Temples remained active. Communities worshipped according to their own customs. This flexibility became one reason such a vast empire remained relatively stable for generations. But even while Persia reached extraordinary heights, new tensions quietly emerged along its western frontier. Across the Aegean Sea lay the independent Greek city-states. Unlike Persia's centralized monarchy, the Greek world consisted of many separate communities, each proud of its independence. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. They frequently argued with one another. Sometimes they fought bitter wars. Yet they shared language, religious traditions, and cultural ties. At first, Persia had little reason to fear them. Most Greek cities were small compared with the empire's enormous resources. But history has a habit of allowing small events to grow into turning points. In the Ionian cities along the coast of Asia Minor, many Greek communities lived under Persian rule. Around 499 BCE, these cities rebelled. Athens sent limited support. From Persia's perspective, this was more than a local disturbance. It was outside interference inside imperial territory. The rebellion was eventually defeated. But Darius did not forget Athens. He reportedly instructed a servant to remind him regularly. "Master, remember the Athenians." Whether those exact words were spoken or later invented hardly matters. They capture an important truth. The relationship between Persia and Greece had changed. Soon, armies would march across the Aegean. Ships would fill narrow straits. Names like Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea would become legendary. But for the moment, none of that had happened. The farmers of Persepolis still tended orchards beneath warm spring skies. Children still played in village courtyards. Priests still tended sacred fires. Stone masons continued shaping enormous columns that would stand for centuries. Life, for most people, remained wonderfully ordinary. Yet beyond the western horizon, two very different civilizations were slowly moving toward a confrontation that neither fully understood. And what followed would become one of the most famous chapters in the history of both Persia and the ancient world. The first signs of the coming storm did not appear as towering armies crossing open plains. They began with whispers carried by merchants, letters sealed with wax, and uneasy reports from governors stationed along the empire's western edge. To many people living deep inside Persia, the distant Greek city-states seemed too small to deserve much attention. Their lands were divided, their politics often chaotic, and their leaders frequently disagreed with one another. Yet history has a curious way of allowing small places to shape the destiny of great empires. King Darius believed that Athens and Eretria had encouraged rebellion within his empire. From his perspective, allowing such interference to go unanswered could encourage further unrest. A ruler responsible for land stretching across 3 continents could not afford to appear weak, even in distant provinces. So preparations quietly began. Across the empire, craftsmen repaired armor. Blacksmiths sharpened spearheads. Horses were gathered from fertile plains, while ships were prepared along the eastern Mediterranean coast. Messengers rode the royal road carrying orders from one satrapy to another. Thousands of ordinary people found themselves contributing to an imperial campaign they would never personally witness. For a farmer in Egypt, that might mean supplying grain. For a carpenter in Phoenicia, it could mean building ships. For a horse breeder in Media, it meant preparing strong animals for cavalry units. An empire moved because millions of lives moved together. In 490 BCE, Persian forces crossed the Aegean Sea. Their destination was the plain of Marathon. Today the name is famous because of the modern race, but long before runners covered its distance for sport, it became the site of one of history's most remembered battles. The Persian army greatly outnumbered the Athenians, yet numbers alone do not always decide history. The Greek hoplites, heavily armored and fighting in disciplined formations, launched a determined attack. Ancient sources describe fierce fighting beneath the bright Mediterranean sun as shields collided and spears splintered. Eventually, the Persians withdrew. For Athens, Marathon became a symbol of courage. For Persia, it was not the collapse of an empire but an unfinished campaign. Darius intended to return with greater force. But time had other plans. Before another invasion could begin, the great king died. His son, Xerxes I, inherited not only the throne but also the responsibility of defending the empire's prestige. Xerxes ruled over perhaps the richest and most powerful state on earth. His court dazzled visitors. Palaces shimmered with polished stone. Columns rose toward painted ceilings. Gardens carefully arranged flowing water, shade, and flowering plants into peaceful spaces that later generations would associate with the very idea of paradise. The old Persian word for such enclosed royal gardens would eventually influence languages far beyond Iran. Life at court appeared magnificent. But beneath the beauty lay constant responsibility. Every day brought petitions from distant provinces, reports from governors, diplomatic messages, military concerns, and difficult decisions affecting millions of subjects. Being king of kings meant carrying endless burdens. Several years after taking the throne, Xerxes launched perhaps the greatest military expedition the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient Greek writers claimed astonishing numbers for the Persian army, sometimes describing millions of soldiers. Modern historians consider those figures impossible. Even so, there is little doubt that Xerxes commanded one of the largest military forces assembled in antiquity. The preparations alone required extraordinary organization. Bridges of boats were constructed across the Hellespont. Supply depots stored food for thousands. Roads were improved. Water sources were carefully planned. Every stage demanded careful coordination. Imagine standing beside that floating bridge. The sea moves gently beneath hundreds of connected vessels while soldiers, horses, carts, and officials pass steadily across. Flags flutter in the wind. Armor catches the morning light. Somewhere nearby, scribes record supplies while officers consult maps spread across wooden tables. The invasion had begun. The first great obstacle appeared at Thermopylae. The narrow mountain pass offered the Greeks a chance to delay the Persian advance. According to later tradition, King Leonidas of Sparta and his small force fought with remarkable determination before being overwhelmed. History has transformed Thermopylae into a legend. Yet legends often simplify reality. Many Greek allies fought there alongside the Spartans. Many Persian soldiers displayed equal courage while following orders far from home. For the ordinary men on both sides, the battle was not a myth. It was exhausting, frightening, and deeply human. After passing Thermopylae, Persian forces advanced toward Athens. The city was largely evacuated. Those who remained watched as smoke eventually rose above temples and homes. Athens fell. For a brief moment, it seemed Persia had achieved its goal. But history rarely moves in straight lines. The decisive moment came not on land, but at sea. Near the island of Salamis, the Greek fleet waited in narrow waters. Persia possessed more ships. Yet the confined straits reduced that advantage. As dawn broke over calm blue water, hundreds of triremes maneuvered through increasingly crowded channels. Wooden hulls crashed together. Oars splintered. Commands echoed across the waves. The battle gradually turned against the Persians. Many ships struggled to maneuver in the narrow space. The Greek fleet gained momentum. By day's end, Persian naval power had suffered a devastating setback. Xerxes eventually returned to Asia, leaving part of his army behind. The following year, at Plataea, Greek forces secured another important victory. The great invasion had failed. Yet it is important to pause here. Popular history often presents these wars as a simple struggle between freedom and tyranny. Reality was far more complicated. The Persian Empire remained extraordinarily successful after these defeats. Its administration continued functioning. Its economy remained strong. Its roads still connected continents. Its cities continued growing. Millions of people across the empire experienced little immediate change. For them, life continued. Markets opened at sunrise. Children studied with teachers. Farmers harvested barley and wheat. Priests tended sacred fires. Merchants loaded camels before dawn. History's most famous battles often occupy only a tiny part of ordinary life. The empire endured for more than a century after Xerxes. Kings came and went. Some ruled effectively. Others struggled with palace intrigues and regional revolts. The court remained magnificent, yet maintaining such a vast realm demanded constant effort. Far away in Macedonia, meanwhile, another story quietly began. A prince named Alexander was growing up listening to tales of Persian wealth and the earlier wars between Greece and the empire. His father, Philip II, transformed Macedonia into a formidable military power before his assassination. When Alexander inherited the throne in 336 BCE, he was only 20 years old. He was brilliant. He was ambitious. And he believed the impossible might be achievable. To many observers, invading Persia seemed reckless. The empire remained enormously wealthy and possessed far greater resources. Yet Alexander possessed advantages that numbers alone could not measure. His army was highly disciplined. His officers were experienced. His leadership inspired remarkable loyalty. And perhaps most importantly, the Persian Empire was no longer as united as it had once been. King Darius III faced growing internal difficulties. Regional loyalties sometimes outweighed imperial unity. Communication across vast distances always required time. Small delays could become major problems. Alexander crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BCE. His victories came one after another. At the Granicus River. At Issus. Finally, at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. There, beneath the broad skies of Mesopotamia, the future of the Persian Empire hung in the balance. Darius III commanded a massive army. He chose open ground favorable for cavalry. Chariots equipped with blades were prepared. Elephants may even have been present, though the evidence remains uncertain. Alexander carefully studied the battlefield. He recognized weaknesses. At the crucial moment, he led a bold cavalry charge directly toward the Persian center. Confusion spread. Darius withdrew from the field. The battle was lost. Soon afterward, Alexander entered the great capitals of the empire. Babylon welcomed him peacefully. Susa surrendered. Then came Persepolis. The ceremonial heart of Achaemenid Persia. Imagine arriving there for the first time. Great staircases climb toward immense halls supported by towering columns. Stone reliefs still display delegations from every nation once ruled by Persian kings. The winter air is cool. Torches flicker against polished walls. Treasuries contain unimaginable wealth accumulated over generations. It must have seemed like the center of the world. And then came the fire. Ancient sources disagree about exactly why Persepolis burned. Some blame drunken celebration. Others suggest deliberate revenge for the earlier burning of Athens. Perhaps both explanations contain part of the truth. Perhaps neither tells the whole story. What is certain is that flames consumed large sections of the palace complex. Smoke rose into the Persian sky. Wooden roofs collapsed. Magnificent halls became silent ruins. Even today, visitors walking among the surviving columns can almost imagine the echoes of that terrible night. Yet this was not the end of Iran. It was only the end of one dynasty. Alexander quickly realized that ruling Persia required more than military victories. He adopted elements of Persian court ceremony. He retained many Persian officials. He encouraged cooperation between Macedonian and Persian elites. Some of his own followers disliked these decisions. But Alexander understood something Cyrus had known centuries earlier. Conquering a land is easier than governing it. For ordinary Persian families, life continued despite the changing rulers. Fields still required planting. Canals still needed repair. Children still learned the old stories. Languages continued to be spoken. Customs remained alive within homes and villages. Empires could rise and fall. Culture often endured. Alexander himself would not enjoy his triumph for long. In 323 BCE, while still in his early 30s, he died suddenly in Babylon. His vast empire fragmented almost immediately. Generals who had once fought beside him turned against one another. Kingdoms emerged from the ruins. And in the lands of ancient Persia, something remarkable began to happen. Although foreign dynasties ruled for generations, Iranian traditions quietly survived beneath the surface, waiting for another opportunity to shape history once again. The age of the Achaemenids had ended. But the story of Iran was far from over. In time, new Persian kingdoms would rise, challenge Rome itself, revive ancient traditions, and once again become one of the world's greatest civilizations. Alexander's empire looked invincible. Maps painted by his generals showed a realm that stretched from Greece to the edges of India, larger than anything the Mediterranean world had ever known. Royal messengers still rode across the same ancient roads that Persian kings had built. Taxes continued to flow into great cities. Markets remained crowded. Farmers still harvested grain beneath familiar skies. To many ordinary people, life appeared surprisingly unchanged. But beneath that appearance, the foundations were already beginning to crack. The man who had united this enormous empire was gone. In Babylon, in 323 BCE, Alexander died unexpectedly at just 32 years old. Ancient writers offered many explanations. Some suspected illness. Others whispered of poison. Modern historians generally believe disease is the more likely answer, but certainty remains impossible after more than 2,000 years. What mattered was not how he died. It was what happened next. Alexander left behind no clear adult heir capable of ruling such a vast empire. His generals, men who had marched beside him across deserts and mountains, now found themselves asking the same dangerous question. Who would rule the world? No one possessed an easy answer. Within months, alliances shifted. Friendships dissolved. Former companions became rivals. The empire that had seemed so powerful was divided into competing kingdoms, each controlled by ambitious military commanders. For the people living across the old Persian heartland, another change of rulers had arrived. Yet this land had already experienced many dynasties. Its identity proved stronger than any single conqueror. Most of Iran eventually came under the rule of the Seleucid Empire, founded by Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's former generals. The Seleucid kings attempted to combine Greek traditions with the administrative systems they had inherited from Persia. New cities appeared, many designed according to Greek ideas of urban planning. Wide streets crossed at right angles. Public squares became gathering places. Temples reflected Hellenistic architecture while older Iranian traditions quietly continued in surrounding villages. Greek became an important language of government and trade. Yet everyday life remained wonderfully diverse. Walk through a market in ancient Iran during this period and you might hear several languages before reaching the next street. Merchants from Central Asia bargained beside local craftsmen. Caravan leaders discussed routes to India while scholars debated philosophy influenced by both Greek and Persian traditions. Culture was rarely one thing. It became richer through contact. For a time, the Seleucid rulers maintained control over these enormous territories. But great empires often struggle with distance. Their attention was constantly divided. While one king dealt with unrest in Syria, trouble emerged in Central Asia. If he marched east, western frontiers became vulnerable. If he strengthened one province, another complained of neglect. Slowly, almost quietly, a new power began to emerge beyond the northeastern frontier. Its founders were not wealthy kings. They were skilled horsemen. Among the nomadic peoples of Central Asia lived a group known as the Parnai. Their leader, Arsaces, seized an opportunity during the weakening of Seleucid authority. Around the middle of the 3rd century BCE, he established control over part of northeastern Iran. At first, few observers imagined this small kingdom would become anything remarkable. History has surprised people like that before. The Arsacid dynasty, better known today as the Parthian Empire, steadily expanded over the following generations. Unlike the centralized bureaucracy of the Achaemenids, the Parthian state often relied upon powerful noble families who enjoyed considerable independence. The king remained important, but local aristocrats held significant influence. This made the kingdom both flexible and complicated. Sometimes unity came easily. Sometimes it required endless negotiation. The Parthians became famous for something else as well. Their cavalry. Across broad plains and rolling grasslands, Parthian horsemen perfected techniques that astonished their enemies. Many were expert archers capable of firing arrows while riding at high speed. One maneuver became legendary. Pretending to retreat, a rider would suddenly twist backward in the saddle and release arrows toward pursuing enemies. Centuries later, this tactic gave rise to the expression the Parthian shot. It was more than clever horsemanship. It reflected patience, discipline, and deep familiarity with life on horseback. The Parthians soon encountered another expanding civilization: Rome. At first, neither empire fully understood the other. But geography ensured they would eventually meet. Between them stretched fertile Mesopotamia, wealthy trade routes, and strategic cities that both considered valuable. Conflict became almost inevitable. One of the most famous encounters occurred in 53 BCE. A Roman general named Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Roman history and a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, sought military glory in the east. His campaign ended near the town of Carrhae. The Roman army marched confidently across hot, open ground. Heavy infantry formed disciplined lines. Standards bearing the eagle glinted beneath the sun. Across the plain waited Parthian cavalry. The battle unfolded very differently from what the Romans expected. Mounted archers surrounded the Roman formations, remaining beyond easy reach while releasing wave after wave of arrows. Whenever Roman soldiers attempted pursuit, the horsemen simply rode away. Then they returned. Again. And again. The desert air filled with dust and the constant sound of arrows striking shields. Eventually, Roman discipline began to collapse. Crassus himself was killed during the disastrous campaign. The defeat shocked Rome. For perhaps the first time, many Romans fully appreciated the strength of the empire rising beyond their eastern frontier. Yet neither Rome nor Parthia could completely defeat the other. Instead, centuries of rivalry followed. Sometimes there was war. Sometimes peace. Sometimes diplomacy. Border cities changed hands repeatedly. Merchants continued trading even while emperors exchanged threats. Silk from China crossed Central Asia into Iran before reaching Roman markets. Spices traveled west. Glassware moved east. Ideas accompanied every caravan. Religion spread along these same roads. Languages borrowed words from distant neighbors. No empire existed in isolation. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued living ordinary lives. Imagine a family in a Parthian village. Morning begins before sunrise. A mother prepares bread in a clay oven. Children help carry water from an irrigation canal. A father checks vineyards or grain fields before the heat of midday. Travelers occasionally stop with news from distant cities. Some stories sound unbelievable. A Roman emperor has changed. A caravan reached India safely. Bandits attacked a mountain pass. Another king has declared war. Most of these events feel impossibly far away. Tomorrow, the fields will still need tending. History often feels distant until it suddenly arrives at one's own doorstep. By the 2nd century CE, however, signs of change became impossible to ignore. The Parthian Empire remained powerful, but internal rivalries increasingly weakened central authority. Powerful noble families competed for influence. Different branches of the royal family sometimes supported rival claimants to the throne. These disputes consumed energy that might otherwise have strengthened the empire. Watching carefully from the province of Persis, the ancient homeland of the Achaemenids, another ambitious leader began imagining something greater. His name was Ardashir. Unlike many regional rulers, Ardashir believed he could restore Persian greatness. He gradually defeated neighboring rivals before challenging the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV. The decisive confrontation came around 224 CE. When the fighting ended, the Parthian dynasty had fallen. A new chapter in Iranian history had begun. Ardashir founded what historians call the Sasanian Empire. The choice carried deep symbolism. The new rulers consciously connected themselves to the memory of ancient Persia. Royal ceremonies became more elaborate. Zoroastrianism received stronger official support. Kings adopted impressive titles emphasizing their authority. Monuments carved into cliffs celebrated victories and royal legitimacy. One can still stand before some of these magnificent rock reliefs today. There, frozen in stone, kings on horseback receive symbols of divine favor while defeated enemies kneel below. The carvings were meant to last forever. Many nearly have. The Sasanian rulers transformed Iran into one of the great superpowers of late antiquity. To the west stood Rome, and later the Byzantine Empire. To the east stretched Central Asia and the trade routes leading toward India and China. Between these worlds, Iran once again became a bridge linking civilizations. Magnificent cities flourished. Engineers improved irrigation systems. Scholars preserved learning. Silk, silver, carpets, perfumes, and finely crafted metalwork became admired across continents. At the royal capital of Ctesiphon rose one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. The great arch known today as the Takht Kasra soared above visitors with astonishing scale. Even now, after centuries of earthquakes, wars, and weather, its surviving remains hint at the ambition of the civilization that built it. As evening settled over the city, lamps illuminated palace halls while merchants closed market stalls. Priests tended sacred fires that had burned continuously for generations. Musicians entertained noble families. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, children laughed in narrow streets, unaware that they lived within one of history's greatest empires. But history rarely allows long periods of perfect peace. Far beyond the horizon, new religious ideas were beginning to spread across Arabia. Old powers were becoming exhausted after generations of warfare. The Byzantine and Sasanian empires had spent decades struggling against one another. Both had won victories. Both had suffered terrible losses. Neither realized that a completely new force was about to emerge. And when it did, the history of Iran, and much of the world, would change forever. The Sasanian Empire stood at the height of its power with the confidence of a civilization that believed it had weathered every storm. Its kings ruled from magnificent palaces. Its armies guarded frontiers that stretched from the mountains of Armenia to the deserts beyond the Persian Gulf. Its merchants carried silk, spices, precious stones, and silver across continents. Its scholars preserved knowledge in libraries, while Zoroastrian priests tended sacred fires that had burned for generations. To those living within its borders, the empire seemed enduring. Not eternal, perhaps. Ancient people understood that kingdoms rose and fell. But few imagined that within the span of a single generation, the political world they had always known would disappear. The signs of weakness were easy to miss at first. For decades, the Sasanians and the Byzantine Empire had fought one exhausting war after another. Sometimes Persia gained the advantage. Sometimes Byzantium fought back. Cities changed hands. Fortresses were captured and recaptured. Entire provinces watched armies march across their fields more than once. Every campaign demanded more soldiers, more horses, more food, more taxes. For ordinary families, these wars were not lines in a history book. They were fathers leaving home for years. Fields left untilled. Villages rebuilding after passing armies. Children growing up with stories of distant battles they barely understood. One of the greatest Sasanian rulers was Khosrow I, often remembered as Khosrow Anushirvan, the immortal soul. He ruled during the 6th century and became known for administrative reforms, support of learning, and efforts to strengthen the empire. Under his reign, roads were improved, taxes were reorganized, and justice became an important ideal of kingship. Persian literature would remember him as a wise ruler. Reality, as always, was more complicated. He fought difficult wars and faced serious political challenges. Yet compared with many rulers of his age, he left behind a reputation for intelligence and careful government. His successors inherited a strong empire. But they also inherited growing pressures. Then came Khosrow II. At first, fortune seemed to favor him. Civil war within the Byzantine Empire created an extraordinary opportunity. Persian armies swept across the Near East with astonishing success. They captured Damascus. They entered Jerusalem in 614 CE. According to historical accounts, the True Cross, one of Christianity's most sacred relics, was taken to Persia. Soon afterward, Persian forces occupied Egypt. For a brief moment, it appeared that the Sasanian Empire had achieved a level of dominance not seen since the days of the Achaemenids. If someone had looked at a map during those years, they might have believed Persia was entering another golden age. But maps can be deceiving. Victories often create new burdens. Holding conquered lands required enormous resources. Supply lines stretched across deserts and mountains. Garrisons demanded food. Governors required protection. Taxes increased. The empire expanded faster than it could comfortably sustain itself. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius refused to surrender. Instead, he reorganized his army and launched bold counterattacks deep into Persian territory. Campaign after campaign slowly shifted the balance. By the late 620s, Persia itself faced invasion. The victories that had once seemed permanent suddenly appeared fragile. Political stability collapsed. Khosrow II was overthrown. Within only a few years, several rulers occupied the throne in rapid succession. Each change weakened confidence. Provincial governors acted more independently. Noble families competed for influence. Ordinary people could no longer be certain who would rule from one year to the next. History has shown this pattern many times. External enemies become most dangerous when internal unity begins to disappear. While these struggles consumed the attention of both Persia and Byzantium, something remarkable was unfolding farther south. Across the Arabian Peninsula, a new religious community was taking shape around the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. At first, neither the Byzantine nor the Sasanian Empire considered this movement an existential threat. Arab tribes had long lived along the borders of both empires. Many served as allies or trading partners. Few imagined that events unfolding in Arabia would soon reshape the political and religious landscape of the Middle East. After the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the Muslim community remained united under the leadership of the first caliphs. Expansion followed with surprising speed. Arab armies entered territories that had already been weakened by decades of war between the two superpowers. This timing proved crucial. Had Persia and Byzantium remained at full strength, events might have unfolded very differently. Instead, both empires were exhausted. The decisive confrontation came in 636 CE at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. The exact details remain debated by historians, and the surviving accounts were often written years later. Even so, there is broad agreement that the battle marked a turning point. The Sasanian army fought bravely. War elephants advanced across the battlefield. Experienced commanders attempted to organize resistance. But the empire's earlier unity had faded. After intense fighting, the Persian forces were defeated. The road into the heart of Mesopotamia lay open. Not long afterward came another major defeat at Nahavand in 642 CE, remembered in some later traditions as the Victory of Victories. The phrase reflected how decisive people believed the battle had been. The last Sasanian king, Yazdijerd III, fled eastward. He continued seeking support for several years, moving from one region to another. Eventually, in 651 CE, he was killed. With his death, the Sasanian dynasty came to an end. Yet this was not the end of Iran. It was another transformation. That distinction matters. Political power changed hands. Religious life gradually changed. Administrative systems evolved. But Persian culture did not disappear. Languages survived. Poetry survived. Craftsmanship survived. Family traditions survived. Memory survived. The early centuries after the Islamic conquest were complex. Conversion to Islam happened gradually rather than instantly. Many communities continued practicing Zoroastrianism for generations. Others embraced Islam over time for spiritual, social, political, or economic reasons. The process differed from one region to another. Persian scholars soon became some of the most influential figures in the Islamic world. This is one of history's fascinating ironies. A civilization that had lost its empire would help shape a new civilization on an extraordinary scale. Cities such as Nishapur, Ray, Isfahan, and later Shiraz became centers of learning. Scientists explored mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Philosophers translated and expanded upon Greek knowledge. Artists developed intricate calligraphy and architecture. Poets transformed the Persian language into one of the world's great literary traditions. Among the greatest of these poets was Ferdowsi. Around the year 1010, he completed the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. More than a collection of stories, it became a bridge connecting Islamic-era Iran with its ancient past. Within its verses lived Cyrus, Darius, legendary heroes, mythical kings, dragons, battles, and timeless questions about justice, pride, fate, and power. The Shahnameh reminded generations of Iranians that their history stretched far beyond any single dynasty.